Joining us now, representative from Georgia, Paul Broun, MD, also a candidate for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate in Georgia. He'll be running in the Republican primary, which I believe is in July of 2014, one of probably 4 or 5 candidates in that field to vie for the nomination for the chance to take on the Georgia Democratic nominee to replace the retiring Saxby Chambliss. How are you, Dr. Broun?
I'm outstanding, John. It's great to be with you again.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, sir. And I want to get to the op-ed that you did on the editorial page of the New York Times that was published on Tuesday, March 19th. And by the way, I thought was an outstanding piece of journalism. And the title of your editorial was Paul Ryan's Axe Isn't Sharp Enough. One of the things that really jumped out at me was the fact that the real dollar spending difference over a decade between the liberal Harry Reid budget plan and the Paul Ryan plan was only $5 trillion, or basically less than 10% spending. I mean, isn't that mind-boggling?
It is mind-boggling, and the problem with the Ryan budget is it does not cut spending one iota, not at all. In fact, all it does is it slows the growth of spending over what the Democrats are proposing. We've got to stop this out-of-control spending that both parties are guilty of doing here in Washington, John, because it's already right now today, it's harming our economy, it's killing jobs, and it's saddling future generations with a crushing debt. It just has to stop, and the Ryan budget does not do that. It continues to spend money, actually spend more and more money over the 10-year period of time, and does not even cut spending at all.
So essentially, the Ryan budget, as you've called it out, is simply spending a smaller increase than the Democrat budget. For instance, in the Democrat budget, they're calling for a 5% increase annually in government spending, where the Ryan budget is calling for a 3.5% increase in spending. So essentially, at the end of the day, between these two plans, there's not a dime's worth of difference.
Well, that's correct. I guess it's 1.5 or 1.6% difference is the only difference in the increase in the spending. So it just has to stop. And that's what I've been doing here in Washington ever since I've been here, is to try to get this government headed in the right direction fiscally. I'm an original intent constitutionalist, which means that the federal government should only do those things that the Constitution specifically gives us the authority to do. And I'm looking for bridges to send powers back to the states and the people. But let's talk about very specific issues.
Right.
For instance, I have proposed totally closing down the Department of Education. In fact, that was in my op-ed, too. Right now today, the average salary in the U.S. Department of Education is $103,000 a year. That's over twice what teachers in Georgia on the average make. Let's shut it down. Let's send those dollars back to the states. Let's pay our teachers more money and let them teach. Let's get the shackles off of them that the federal government and No Child Left Behind has put on them. And let us have a stellar educational system again, where when we have a U.S. Department of Education running it, it is dumbing down our kids and destroying our education system. And while we're at the process, why don't we shut down the EPA? I'd like to see that happen also. The EPA is destroying jobs today. The state's EPD, Environmental Protection Division in Georgia is what it's called, can handle these things. We must be good stewards of our environment. I started off my political activism as a conservationist, and we need to be good stewards of our environment, but we don't need this big federal police agency called the EPA that's destroying jobs, and I can go on and on.
Well, you've also, in your op-ed, you were extremely specific, because a lot of people talk about, we need to cut spending, but then they don't give you anything that they really want to cut. The other thing that you said that I thought made a lot of sense is, why do we have a Department of Energy? Why don't we just scrap that?
Absolutely. In fact, the Department of Energy should be closed, and the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce, all these things can be closed. The states can do these functions very, very well, and let's start being fiscally responsible, living within our means. Let's pass my balanced budget amendment, which is the toughest one out there. Let's pass my jobs bill, which would create millions and millions of new jobs. And one very famous economist, world famous economist, said that my jobs bill would be so big there's no economic model to even judge how big it would be, because it would be so huge.
What is that?
We've got to do that. Those types. Let's rip Obamacare out by the roots and replace it with my Patient Option Act that will put patients in charge. Will lower the cost of health insurance. Will provide coverage for all Americans. It's going to save Medicare from going broke. Let's put in good policy instead of bigger government that's destroying our nation financially.
I would ask you, because you have advocated in this op-ed for the repeal of Obamacare, but not even stopping there, replacing it with the market-based healthcare system devoid of government involvement, can you give us more details on your Patient Option Act?
Absolutely. In fact, that's exactly what it does that you just described. It puts patients and doctors in charge of all healthcare decisions. It will lower the cost of all healthcare goods and services, including the cost of insurance for everybody instead of raising it like Obamacare does. And it will get the government out of making healthcare decisions for everybody. It will save Medicare from going broke. What it does is it has several different points that cover it's going to provide coverage for all Americans, and it's the kind of policy that is non-governmental, it's market-based, and it makes sense economically. It makes sense constitutionally according to the original intent, and most importantly, it makes sense for patients because they will control their own health care decisions along with their doctor. So that's the kind of policy that we need. I introduced the Patient Option Act in the last Congress along with the State Health Flexibility Act. I'm combining the two of them this year, and we're tweaking a little bit, so the Patient Option Act will be reintroduced in this Congress. And once we do that, it is going to totally close down the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So it's going to be a huge cost saving for the American taxpayer also.
Congressman Broun, I have one question for you before I hand you back to John. You have been a major proponent of a balanced budget amendment.
Right.
I would ask you up on the Hill, has the No Budget, No Pay Act really forced Democrats to the table in negotiating a budget moving forward, since we haven't had one since April 29th, 2009?
Well, in fact, in the last Congress, I introduced my budget a bus bill that would do the same thing that this bill did. I think the Senate, from what I understood, was going to do a budget anyway. There's been so much press about their failing to do what the law requires. But my budget a bus bill actually put us back on a constitutional basis. In reality, according to the Constitution, all bills regarding the raising of revenue, which means appropriations bills, budget bills, and tax bills, should start in the House of Representatives. We should not have a presidential budget. We should not have a Senate budget. They all should constitutionally start in the House. But the Budget Act of 72, I think, around there, 74 maybe, required the president to produce a budget and the Senate to produce a budget, which is not what the Constitution calls for anyway. My Budget a Bust Act would say if you don't produce a budget, you don't get paid, and it would put it back on a constitutional basis. We've got to start demanding constitutionally limited government, as our founding fathers meant it, because we're destroying our freedom, we're destroying our economy, we're destroying jobs, because we've destroyed those original principles that this country was founded upon, and I fight for those every day. I fight for liberty.
To enlighten our audience, Dr. Broun, what exactly is your jobs bill?
My jobs bill, we're reintroducing it also. We're adding some things to it, I think, John. But in the last Congress, my jobs bill would permanently lower corporate taxes and capital gains taxes to zero. Now, what that would mean, it also allow businesses to have an immediate write-off of capital expenditures, which means that if they write the check, they can write it off the income taxes. What that would mean is that job producers would have money in their pockets, so they expand. And let me tell you how this works. I talked to a manager of a multinational corporation who has a manufacturing plant in my district. They hire about 400 employees. I asked him if we lowered the corporate tax rates from 35%, the highest in the world, down to 25%, what would be his response to that action? He said, Paul, if you do that, we'll expand our manufacturing line here. We'll probably hire another 25 to 50 people. And I said, well, great. What would, if we lowered it to zero, what would happen? He said, Paul would be looking all over America to find places to build plants and move plants back to the United States. The high tax rate and the regulatory burden on business is what's driving money as well as jobs away from America. We've got to stop that bleeding of jobs and the bleeding of our good, hard earned taxpayers' money are being sent away because of an overburdensome government. We just have to stop it, and my jobs bill will do that.
Isn't the model that proves that works illustrated by the Colorado gun manufacturer moving down to Texas and actually drawing two of his suppliers down there with him?
Absolutely. In fact, we saw this happen one time where I think it was under the Reagan administration. They had a repatriation of money that's been held offshore.
Yes.
And what my jobs bill would do would immediately infuse over $1 trillion of money being repatriated, brought back to this country, because it's being held in other countries. It was made in other countries, taxes were paid in other countries, but because of our high federal tax rate on businesses, the companies have to keep it away from America. And it would immediately bring $1 trillion new dollars, not these funny dollars that the Fed's doing with all their quantitative easing. It would infuse over $1 trillion into our economy immediately, overnight. What would that do to our economy? It would just absolutely soar. That's the reason the economists said there's no model to project how big it would be. It would create millions and millions of new jobs here in this country. That's the kind of policy that we need to put in place.
Well, that absolutely makes sense. You know, that was sponsored in Congress earlier by Tim Scott of South Carolina also, because what happens is that money that's made overseas, it's already taxed, but if you take it home into our shores, then it gets retaxed, and so they just keep it over there and invest it over there instead of taking it home. And as you said, during Reagan, we already had a model that shows it works. You know, as we look at your plans, they make so much sense. How do you win this Senate seat in Georgia? How do you become the nominee?
Well, the way I become the nominee is for people to contribute all over the country, and we're working on trying to get that to happen, and just build a grassroots network. I'm a grassroots guy, and what I have right now is a tremendous grassroots excitement within the grassroots activists all across the state. So we're building a very solid campaign. I've got a couple of Republican House colleagues that are looking at running against me. I'm the only declared candidate this time. Both of them have, one has $1 million cash on hand, the other one has $2 million cash on hand, but I've got the people, so we just need to raise enough money that we can win. I've got a website, paulbroun.com, it's BROUN, that where people can volunteer and can get our newsletters. They can subscribe to our newsletter updates, and they can also contribute. So that's what we're doing, is promoting the website, and we're promoting my grassroots connections all across the state. With it, I'm a veteran, so veterans groups, Second Amendment people, the Tea Party, various Tea Party groups, the constitutionalists, since I'm an original intent constitutionalist, those people who are concerned about the constitutional government, the liberty groups, etc. I've got a lot of grassroots support. We just raising the money and raising the grassroots that we can utilize to win this race.
The link to his terrific op-ed piece in the New York Times is on the John Fredericks Facebook page. We're out of time for today. Congressman Broun. Dr. Broun, thank you so much for the time. We
Thank
appreciate
y'all.
it.
God bless you. Thank you.